Okay, I believe you all received a notice that this is being recorded. All right. Well, welcome to all of you. I'm John Slater with Orcas Senior Center, and this is our second to the last presentation for the 2021 season of Meeting the Minds, which we've conducted on Zoom this season. Today's presentation is Forage, Fishes, and the Beach, the role of local shorelines in marine ecosystem recovery, with speaker Tina Whitman. Before we get started, I'm just going to explain some buttons for those of you who may be new to Zoom. Right now, you're all muted. Lower left, you'll find the microphone icon, which you can use to mute and unmute yourself, although presently everybody is muted, and I'll allow people to unmute themselves for the Q&A afterwards. Next to the microphone, you'll see the video start icon, stop icon, and you can either show your self on video or not, as you see fit. At the top right of your screen, you'll see the view icon. You can choose to have speaker view, in which the speaker is featured predominantly or everybody displayed equally. Of course, I recommend speaker view for this presentation. And now with that, on with the show. I'm pleased to welcome Orcas resident Tina Whitman, staff scientist for Friends of the San Juans. Tina received a Master's of Science from the University of Oregon and has worked on coastal habitat conservation in the island communities, both in New England and here in the Pacific Northwest. Since 2002, Tina has managed shoreline research, restoration, and protection programs for Friends of the San Juans. Today, Tina will share the latest scientific understanding, the importance and status of marine shoreline habitats in the San Juans while highlighting connections to regional food webs. Tina will also address opportunities and local actions to promote the recovery of Chinook salmon and the southern resident orca. And with that, I turn it over to Tina. Welcome, Tina.
Great, thank you, John. Thanks so much for the opportunity to speak to everyone. I am gonna take a second here and just share my screen, so bear with me. Okay, is everybody seeing a slide? And I'll get in slideshow mode here in a second.
Yeah, it's showing up just fine.
Great. Great, well, thanks, John, for the introduction. Again, I'm Tina Whitman here with Friends of the San Juans, and today we're going to talk about forage fish and our special shorelines. And I know for those of us who live here, we have a lot of appreciation for these shorelines, but we're going to dive a little deeper into the science and some of the actions that folks can take to be part of recovering our marine ecosystem. So what I'm going to cover today, we'll do a quick intro to who we are here at Friends and what our priorities are. Then we'll really center our attention onto local shorelines, get our phones put down, turn the email off. I wish we were all out on a boat together, but we're on Zoom. So we're going to do our best to sort of bring ourselves into the present of our local shorelines. After that, I'll talk about the meat of this is really the science on our shoreline species habitats. And then I'll kind of wrap with some actions that we can do, that all of us can do as community members here in the islands to support marine recovery. And we'll have a Q&A in the end, so please just hold your questions, and thanks very much. So the background on Friends, we've been around since 1979, and we were formed to support San Juan County's first efforts to do comprehensive land use planning. And that's still a real priority for us. Although we have expanded into other areas, which I'll talk about in a second. Our mission here at Friends is to protect and restore the San Juan Islands and the Salish Sea for people and nature. And we do that working towards three primary goals, which we arrange our program areas into: healthy seas, natural shorelines, and thriving communities. Some example projects in some of these are things like oils work to prevent oil spills, vessel traffic safety, restoration and protection and education around our shorelines. And then our thriving communities picks up our protection of agricultural and forest lands, supporting those industries here in the county, and also the secondary benefits they provide all of us, and a lot of our education programs as well. So why am I spending an hour on just shorelines in the San Juans, right? What's so special about the San Juans? And it's really driven by our geography and our geology. So we have really diverse shoreline types, high ecological values here. Our ecosystem services here in the San Juans with our shorelines are supporting local ecosystems, but also the regional marine ecosystem. Something that's a little unique in the San Juans compared to other places is that the vast majority of our shorelines are in private and predominantly residential ownership. And as you can see on this map, our location kind of at the heart of the Salish Sea and our high kind of shoreline to either open water or land ratio, right? A very high proportion of our county is that land-sea interface, the shoreline area that we're going to focus on. And that again is sort of the reason that's driving sort of the importance of us from an ecological standpoint. These shorelines are also why a bunch of us are here, right? And why we appreciate and love this place so much. What makes us so special? We're a community of islands. There aren't that many communities of islands, counties of islands. Shorelines in the San Juans stretch, if you laid them out end to end, would stretch from Eugene, Oregon to Vancouver, British Columbia, over 400 miles, more shoreline than any other county in the lower 48. And now we'll take a little tour just to kind of ground ourselves again of why shorelines are so much a part of who we are here in the islands for people and also for nature. We're important for salmon highways, for the big ones coming home and for the little ones on their way out to sea. While we don't have the big river deltas of some other places, we are important habitat for juvenile and adult salmon. We're also have habitat for international shipping lanes and critical habitat for our southern resident orca. These marine waters in our backyard support both of these things. We're an internationally acclaimed boating destination. This is Susha, last Mother's Day, for anyone who was wondering if the boating was still happening. It's happening in full force, especially with the Canadian border still closed. Our shorelines are a source of inspiration for fish and wildlife, marine recreation, and our shorelines are what connect us to the regional environment. So this eagle eating a salmon on the Skagit River, we're not in Skagit County, but this fish came through here as a 3 to 4 inch long juvenile. They're coming through right now on their way to the ocean, and they come back as adults. So we're making that ecosystem connection through our shorelines. We've got marine habitats such as this bull kelp, our canopy kelp, habitats such as our eelgrass meadows, our marine shorelines, our beaches, and the vegetation along the shorelines, also often called marine riparian vegetation. These are all an important part of our shoreline picture. And our shorelines support our economy, whether it's recreational fishing, commercial fishing, the whale watch and other wildlife viewing industries. And our shoreline development and our residential second and primary home development is also an important part of the economy here in the San Juans. That's very shoreline based. So now that we have that sort of reminder of all these amazing things that the shorelines provide us, I want to switch gears a little and start talking about the science and what we know about our shorelines and the species and the habitats that are here. To do that, I think it's really important to just sort of talk about at the very beginning, like, what are we talking about when we say shorelines? Is it just the beach? Is it the trees? Is it out in the water? So this graphic does a pretty good job of kind of summarizing how sort of the scientific community defines shorelines. And so on the deep end out on the right, out into the water, typically the definition stops at the end of the photic zone. So that's the area, the depth at where enough light gets through that light-dependent species such as kelp and eelgrass can grow. So in a really clear, fast-moving water environment like President's Channel, that's going to be pretty deep, maybe 60 feet. The eelgrass will be shallower than that, but the kelp will be deeper. If you're in an embayment that has, less light penetration because of the plankton or the sedimentation in that bay, it might be shallower. So it's not sort of a strict numerical definition. It's really based on function. And then of course we have the beaches and our rocky shores, which is what we all traditionally think about as the shoreline, that intertidal zone, places that are covered sometimes and dry sometimes. And then we have what we call the back shore, kind of the dune log line. It really depends on the kind of shoreline you're at, what that looks like. And then there's a section of what is traditionally called upland that really is part of the shoreline. So the shoreline vegetation, it could go back 200 feet. If there's a 200-foot tall tree that is going to fall and end up as part of that shoreline environment, those bluffs that are eroding and providing sediment that builds our beaches, that's all part of the near shore. So it's a fairly expansive definition. And again, why it's so important is we're really focused on these marine food webs, and that shoreline zone is really the engine of the marine food webs. So some of the species here, we've got minke whale, Chinook salmon, our lingcod, and then this little bird down on the right, which is actually nesting in an old growth forest out on the Olympic Peninsula. Those fish, that's the marble, or those birds, sorry, not the fish, the marbled murrelet seabird nest in old growth forests. They fly to the San Juans to get a mouthful of forage fish and fly back to Olympic National Park to feed their young. And it's because we have so much shoreline to deep water and land ratio that we have the fish here. We've got that high productive zone, and we are really producing the species that are supporting the marine food web. They've also documented these same species of birds coming from the west coast of Vancouver Island into the San Juan Islands to get a mouthful of fish and fly back. And then of course there's our iconic Chinook salmon and southern resident killer whale. When we really talk about marine food webs, people think about sort of the forage fish, the little fish at the bottom supporting the big fish. We typically talk about Chinook salmon, and then our southern resident orca, which of course Chinook salmon is the predominant food item for them, although they eat other salmon as well, chum and other species. So I'll take a minute to kind of unpack this graphic. So this is showing where all the baby salmon, and I'm talking about 3-inch long baby salmon that start showing up in our waters in about February and are here until about October, depending on the species. So first comes the chum, and then the pink, and then the coho and Chinook are here sort of spring and summer, and they're on their way to the ocean. But they don't just cruise through here. So 10 years ago, the scientists thought, oh, by the time they get to the San Juans, those fish are big and offshore, and they are just, on a sort of beeline to the ocean. What research has shown us, really, there was a 2-year project that looked at 85 sites every 2 weeks for 2 years, looking at the salmon, and that's what this chart, the genetic data is drawn from that research, is showing that actually they're using this very near shore of the San Juans. They're feeding here. They're getting refuge from the higher currents. They're getting away from the predators. And it's an important place for them to get big and grow. So the colors on this map are the different stocks of Chinook. So that big red is the lower Fraser River. The greens are the Whidbey Basin. So we've got the Skagit River, the Stilly, the Snohomish. You see the purple on the right there, Nooksack, Samish. There were even small salmon, juvenile salmon from West Vancouver Island streams rearing here in the San Juans. That means they're actually coming in to get bigger and then going back out. And then the relative widths of these arrows is what percentage of the salmon that they found in the islands over those 2 years was that population. So you can see that the Fraser River is contributing a very huge part, close to half. I think it's 40% of the juvenile salmon that are here, and the other basins are contributing as well. And depending on where you are in the county, so if you're way down there on Southeast Lopez, you're probably likely catching Puget Sound Chinook if you're looking at these juvenile fish. If you're up there on Susha or the North Shore of Orcas, you're most likely looking at Canadian fish, although you might also get some Nooksack or Samish. So this is really important information. And again, I mentioned that, 10 years ago, the scientists would sort of say, poo-poo the role of the San Juans in salmon rearing. We don't have the large river deltas. We've got the little spawning stream on Cascade Creek, on Orcas, but we really are providing a huge, an important role, again, to the regional ecosystem. And what are these baby salmon doing when they're here? Well, they're trying to get bigger, right? If you're a fish, you want to be bigger as fast as you can to avoid being eaten. And some of the things that they eat when they're really little, when they're coming through, are plankton. And our larval forage fish, this photo up at the top right, it's a larval forage fish. That's part of the plankton at that stage of their life. The next picture down, that's also plankton, is crab larvae. And these salmon are also eating terrestrial insects, bugs that are falling off that shoreline vegetation, coming down the streams and wetlands into the marine environment. And then as soon as they can get big enough, they'll start eating the young forage fish. There was a NOAA study done just a few years ago that showed that in the San Juans, juvenile salmon are finding more small forage fish, and thus they're growing faster than a juvenile salmon feeding along the shores of Whatcom County or along the shores of Island County. So the fish are getting bigger here faster. And when you're a fish, that's all about survival. The bigger you get, the better your chance of survival. I like this picture in the lower right because it really shows when we're talking near shore for these beach chains, which is where all this data came from for the map that I just showed you. I'm talking really near shore. This is like where you can wade in chest waders near shore. So super shallow water. As I'm still talking about the same study that was done by NOAA Fisheries and Skagit Systems Research Cooperative in those 85 sites over 2 years, twice a month. They found 69 different species of fish using our nearshore. The researchers told me that's about twice the diversity of what they find in other counties around Puget Sound. A huge proportion of that catch is forage fish. Smaller proportion, but not insignificant, were juvenile salmon, and everywhere in the San Juans. So they did not go everywhere, right? They went to 85 sites, but every part of the islands, the north, the south, every kind of shoreline, a bluff, a rocky shore, even inside the county where you might not think that the salmon would come in. So up in West Sound, up in East Sound, in Blind Bay, everywhere had juvenile salmon. And the genetic work showed that 20 of the 22 stocks of our endangered Puget Sound Chinook salmon are rearing in San Juan County. And we were not able to do the genetic work for the BC, to link that all back to the stocks. But in that map that I just showed you, it's primarily Fraser River and then some East Georgia Strait, Vancouver Island. So switching gears to forage fish. So forage fish is what has been really the focus of my work here at Friends over the last 20 years, from research and education to actually implementing restoration and protection projects. And why do we care so much about forage fish? Well, they are what the salmon eat, right? And they're also what seabirds and marine mammals and a lot of other species are eating. So now I'm going to talk us through kind of the three primary forage fish species that we have here in the San Juans. They all rely on our shorelines for spawning. So this is a photo of Pacific herring. They are lower intertidal spawners and they spawn out on the vegetation. So mostly eelgrass in this community, they'll choose whatever's there. So they'll also spawn on kelp and other things. In our county, they spawn late winter, early spring. This is a photo from the Department of Fish and Wildlife when they do their stock assessment surveys. They kind of pull over a rake and have an assessment based on the density of the eggs so that they can actually start making some estimates of herring biomass. Surf smelt. Surf smelt and sand lance, the next two species of forage fish that I'm going to talk about, are intertidal beach spawners, which means they come in at a high tide, lay their eggs, which stay on the beach for a few weeks while they develop, and they're temperature dependent. So in the winter, they're there for almost a month, and in the summer, only 12 to 14 days. So they're using our actual beach habitat, and when the tide goes out, those eggs are still up on the beach, high and dry. So these surf smelt are actually also distantly related to salmon. They have an adipose fin. If anyone in the audience is a salmon fisherman, you're well aware of what the adipose fin is, but it's the smaller fin kind of back above the tail in between the dorsal fin. And there are certain species of anadromous or freshwater spawning smelt, but not here in the county. Surf smelt spawn year round in the San Juans, and as I mentioned, that when the tide goes out, their eggs are often up on the beach. This is one where we got there pretty soon, probably within days of when they had actually spawned. So that sort of cream of wheat looking you know, sort of gray, whiter stuff that's around in that yellow circle, those are the eggs. And you can see I'm sort of up here under the trees, which have an important role in controlling the microclimate for smelt habitat, especially in the summer months. Sand lance or intertidal beach spawners or other intertidal beach spawners, they actually spawn in the winter. And they spawn a little lower on the beach. And if you get lucky enough, and I still have never gotten lucky enough, this is a photo that the Fish and Wildlife person sent me from Island County, but they make those sort of dinner plate shaped impressions in the ground and lay their eggs in there. But once, if you can imagine sort of a few tidal cycles happening, those are quickly washed away. So friends, this played a key role in helping fill the data gap of where these forage fish spawn. They're so important for the marine food webs, for salmon recovery, for seabirds, and we didn't necessarily have enough information on where they were spawning. And while it looks like a lot of dots on this map, it only comes out to about 13 miles out of our over 400 miles of shoreline as actually having forage fish spawning habitat. And I apologize, I don't know, I think if people want to move around their little gallery, maybe you can see the whole screen, but oops, back to that. I'm covering a little bit of this. But to look at this map, the pink are our surf smelt spawning beaches. So again, those are the intertidal beaches. The blue are places where sand lance and surf smelt are spawning at the same location. The yellow are our Pacific sand lance spawning sites. And then that sort of light green in the embayments, so East Sound, West Sound, Blind Bay, Mud Hunter and Shoal Bay on Lopez, and then also the northwest part of San Juan Island. Those are our herring spawning grounds. And again, those are offshore on the submerged aquatic vegetation, mostly eelgrass, sometimes kelps. So looking specifically at eelgrass habitat, so I just talked about that it's really important for herring spawning, but it's also nursery, spawning, feeding habitat for huge hosts of invertebrates, fish, crabs, those Dungeness crabs that we all like to fish for, a lot of things spend their juvenile period of their life when they're a baby in the eelgrass habitat. It's protected, there's food to eat there, and it's close to shore. They're highly productive places. Eelgrass meadows globally play an important role in carbon sequestration, and they also can stabilize soils and then provide structure as habitat for the animals that live there. What do we know about eelgrass? Well, back in 2003, Friends of the San Juans partnered with Department of Natural Resources and the University of Washington to do the first county-wide map of the deep water edge of eelgrass. And we found eelgrass along about 140 linear shoreline miles. As we talked about, eelgrass requires light to grow, and it also needs sort of a sandier soil, not bedrock. So it's not everywhere, but it is widespread in the county. So this map, and you don't have to look at all the dots, but I'll call your attention to a few things. The red dots are places where long-term monitoring data from the Department of Natural Resources shows that eelgrass is declining or disappearing. And the green dots are places that show where it is expanding. The other ones are sort of limited data, no trend, things like that, more stable. But you can see there are a lot of red dots in San Juan County, even compared to places that are much more developed. There's no smoking gun for sort of what's going on. There's some really big drivers, things like, ocean temperature. There also are some more localized things, probably like sedimentation, boating impacts. And then there also is a wasting disease that appears to be impacting the San Juan County population of eelgrass more than in some other places. So switching gears to kelp habitat. So unlike the eelgrass that requires sandy bottom, the kelp actually requires a rock bottom. So this is a photo of obviously the whales. This is the west side of San Juan Island. It's a great land-based whale viewing opportunity. And these are the bull kelp or canopy kelp beds. There's also a multitude of species of kelps that we don't really see or pay much attention to because they're under the water, and we don't see them as easily. And they're on those rocky shores. So if you think about where the eelgrass was in those 140 miles, the opposite places where the geology is bedrock, we have lots of places with bulk kelp, and everywhere also that's rocky. You can sort of pretty much assume that anywhere where the rocky bottom has some sort of species of understory kelp. In a similar project to our eelgrass mapping, Friends partnered with Department of Natural Resources and the University of Washington, flew some infrared aerial flights with Washington Department of Transportation, and mapped bulk kelp in 2007, I think, using high resolution aerial imagery available. That the quality of aerial photos has increased dramatically over the last decade. So recently the Samish Indian Nation and Department of Natural Resources updated that mapping using newer photos, and they documented a decline of about 30% in 10 years. Again, no smoking gun on while that's happening. Kelp is also sensitive to changes in water quality, particularly sensitive to petroleum, and also, of course, the ever-looming climate and changing ocean temperatures. So we talked about the beach spawning forage fish, and you saw the pictures of the smelt eggs right way up there on shore under the trees. Well, beaches are places that humans like to be too, right? This is Shaw County Park, so this is a place where people are just walking and recreating, which is not an issue for the forage fish. But we have lots of places where we are really interacting with the beach, and in many cases, burying beach habitat. So of those 13 miles of known forage fish spawning beaches in the county, just about a third, just under a third, are already armored with seawalls and bulkheads, kind of the terminology we use for this large rock. Typically, they sometimes are concrete, sometimes are wood. In this county, they're very predominantly look a lot like this. So now that we've chatted a little bit about sort of what are our priority species and habitats and some of the threats to those species and habitats, what can we do, right? At Friends, we're really action oriented. We do a lot of science, but we do science that really is directly going to impact our ability to improve our management of our shorelines, our marine waters, and our upland. So shoreline protection. And if you come away with one thing from this whole talk, this is what I want you to write down or go away with. Protection is the most effective action we can take. We're not that good at putting things back together. We don't even know necessarily how to do that right. And it's really expensive. So protection, whether it's just improved stewardship, is it formal protection through an easement or an acquisition with the land bank or the preservation trust? Is it regulatory protection? Those are all the actions that will have the most lasting impact if you want to help support marine food webs. Shoreline restoration too. There is a lot of old weird stuff out there in this county. So this is one place, this is on San Juan Island actually. The landowner, you know, they're not the one that put this in. This probably went in 70 years ago. All that rock is actually from the lime kiln out at Roche Harbor. So we were able to sort of date when the structure went in to when that kiln was active or when those kilns were active. We think maybe they were trying to, you know, stop the marine waters and maybe do some grazing or something in this marsh behind, but nobody really knows. And there was no, it was totally unnecessary, right? And really it was covering what turned out to be a pretty nice beach. So with some pretty simple actions, and some low-hanging fruit. You can also see a little bit in the background there that's sort of not connected to shore anymore, totally falling apart creosote dock. So that's another action, restoration. So just taking out some of these barriers, restoring the natural processes. At Friends, we offer a free technical site visit program for any waterfront landowner. If you want to have someone come out, talk about your habitats and species, look at your management concerns, and see, are there any opportunities for increased stewardship or protection or restoration? We're happy to work with you, so please contact me. Green boating. So this is something that we're really ramping up on, and we're ramping up on before COVID hit, and now everyone's doubling down because we've, you know, anchorages that usually have 4 boats in them have had 19. I'm thinking of right offshore of Indian Island, if anyone's noticed the proliferation of boats the last summer and this summer as well. That's happening across the county. You know, people aren't going to Europe right now. They're buying a yacht or they're using their boat that's here. They're also not going to Canada. So folks are kind of, you know, coming north and stopping here. And it might seem small, that photo in the upper right is sort of the hunk of eelgrass that often comes up when you're anchoring in sort of the more shallow protected bays, right, that tend to be the good anchorages. They also tend to be where our eelgrass is. We're really focusing our protection efforts on these herring spawning grounds, and those areas are on Orcas, East Sound and West Sound. More broadly across the county, it's Blind Bay, a couple of bays on Lopez as well. So this is a photo of a herring spawning event in Northwest East Sound from a couple of years ago. I neglected to put the photo credit on here, but Terry Turner from Opauco sent me this photo. You can see sort of that white, that's the melt or the herring sperm and the water. And then this funny little buoy with the seagull on it. So there are starting to be, and there are not many of them yet, but if folks are boaters and they boat off of Port Townsend in Jefferson County, some of the state parks have some of these. Actually up in British Columbia, they're working on some of these. So there's a real effort to start showing boaters where the eelgrass is, right? So we can really help people make great decisions and better decisions about where they're choosing to anchor their boat. And I would just make the plug that if there's a publicly available mooring buoy, even if you have to pay $10, go for it, right? You're going to sleep better that night. You're not going to worry about dragging. And you also know that you can do your part to help eelgrass. So we've got a lot of resources for boaters. One of them is just this map that's showing where the eelgrass is. Now, obviously, you're not trying to sort of figure out on this kind of a scale, countywide map, where your boat is in relation to that line. You use the key down there, and it gives you a depth that if you're at that depth, you're going to be deeper than the eelgrass. And I talked about, I think I alluded to this earlier with the photic zone conversation, is that in our embayments that are typically less clear water, right? It's just a little more sediment. They might be a little warmer, have more nutrients, so they've got more plankton blooms. The eelgrass just isn't growing that deep. So if you're deeper than 15 feet in one of our embayments, 15 feet at low tide, then you're out of the eelgrass zone and you don't have to think about it. Some of those areas you can see like off of Salmon Banks, right? Like you'd have to be pretty far off, but that's not a place many people anchor anyway because it's such a dynamic zone. For folks, it's again on this buoy and boating realm for green boating. Buoys are a really great alternative to anchoring or building a new dock, right? Do we want every single shoreline parcel in San Juan County, all 300 of them, to have an individual dock? Probably not. Buoys are a great alternative. That said, they need to be designed and located appropriately. And buoy designs have improved dramatically in recent years. They've gotten a lot more cost efficient, they're better at holding your boat in safely, and they are much better at avoiding impacts to eelgrass. So we do have a program offering both funding and technical support to get through the permit process to upgrade buoys and herring spawning areas, which on Orcas are East Sound and West Sound. So if folks have a buoy and are curious if you have you know, one of those newer designs, again, just reach out to me. We're also happy to do talks with boating groups. We're actually talking to folks all around the region, but again, right here in the county, it's great to talk to folks too. Okay, so those are a lot of things that sort of waterfront property owners and boaters can do really directly, right? What can we directly do to reduce stressors on our shorelines or to restore habitat? So these are bigger picture items, but they're equally important, sometimes harder to wrap your head around, but certainly important. So climate mitigation and adaptation. There's actually a lot of restoration opportunity tied into our sea level rise threat, right? We think of sea level rise as this terrible thing, but it does allow us in some cases to say, if we were putting that road there today, is that the best place for it? Is that where we choose to put it? Or is there a different place that provides safe, long-term, cost-effective access and gives us shoreline habitat boost? Waste reduction is obviously important. We're an island community. I think people are really aware of that here. You know, every single thing that we use gets trucked away to somewhere else to store it for long term. So most important with plastics, right? If we're thinking about the marine environment. Become an engaged citizen, right? There's local planning processes, there's regional efforts, and beyond, international, really. And then, of course, the education piece. I am really optimistic every time I work with kids because they get it and they're ready to move to the action phase as well. So with that, I think we'll stop so we have time for questions, and thanks so much. I really appreciate you listening. And please do reach out to me. I really am happy to answer questions, you know, point you to more detail on the research. Again, talking about restoration projects, you know, any topic, feel free to send me an email.
Great. Well, that was a wonderful presentation. And I'm sure we're going to have some questions here. So I've just let the folks unmute themselves. And it doesn't seem like we have so many that we need to use the raise hand feature. I think that if you have a question, I'll just go ahead and jump in with it. And I have a question about buoy design. If I can get this started, is what aspects of buoy design would be more beneficial to eelgrass?
Yeah, great question. So buoy designs, there are some old school ones out there, right? There's bathtubs filled with concrete with a big chain, and even just the concrete bases. So part of it is just reducing the size of the base. So taking up less space on the bottom, so you're not burying where the eelgrass is. And that's primarily the screw anchor design for the eelgrass. Also replacing, nobody's really using those heavy chains anymore. So at low tide, if you're not in deep enough water or don't have enough scope, at low tide, you can sort of create this halo or circle that you're scouring. We can see those halos from satellite photos. So those are a very real thing. The use of a midline float. So again, a line as opposed to a chain, right? It's not so heavy, but it could still end up at the bottom. So if you put this extra little float sort of in the middle, it keeps it up off the bottom, but also low enough, you know, that other boats and things, you know, aren't interfering with your line. It's still buried. And then a big thing of just sort of choosing where you're going to put it, right? A lot of these were put in just sort of, well, I only want to, you know, how close to shore, how easy is it to dinghy in? And sometimes if you add, you know, 3 more strokes of your dinghy, you could be outside of the eelgrass altogether.
Right.
So it's a sighting thing as well as design.
Well, that's fascinating that you know so much about this. I see that Janet Alston has a question. Janet, do you want to go ahead with your question?
Yes, thank you, Tina. That was awesome. I was wondering if you could talk about the conservation easement programs with the San Juan Preservation Trust and the land bank along the shoreline.
Sure. So we are really fortunate in San Juan County that for our salmon recovery efforts, we're not just doing restoration, right? I talked about that was expensive and not as effective as protection. So we have the opportunity to use protection as a tool. The Preservation Trust, who's also been around since 1979, they actually manage through ownership and easement 25 miles of shoreline in our county. So a conservation easement is an agreement between a private landowner, and they retain ownership of that land. And then agreed prescriptions kind of get put into place. They actually do go on the deed. It's our only form of permanent protection. But the trust will work with a landowner to sort of come up with what the suite of protections are. When we're talking about shorelines, it's typically making sure that, you know, shoreline armoring doesn't go in or it isn't a site of a dock. This can happen for undeveloped sites and also for sites that are already developed. I mean, residential development can be compatible with shoreline protection. There's plenty of places where the house is set back enough, you can leave a good buffer. So it's an agreed on thing. It's actually something that there's some value attached to it. So you can gain that value either through your tax relief, federal tax relief, or if it wouldn't, that value wouldn't be useful to you, is federal tax relief. There actually are grants that will pay property owners for the value of those shoreline conservation easements. One thing that's kind of new that we've helped the trust develop in this county is instead of having the easement apply to the whole parcel, in many cases, it just gets applied just to that shoreline piece. And that really lowers the cost for sort of these public grant programs, but also lowers the burden, on the landowner. If you're not planning on developing your shoreline, it makes it really straightforward to just put a permanent easement. The land bank does less with easements, but they also are one of the entities that manages conservation easements. And I'm happy if folks want to just come through me, I'm happy to shoot you to the right people at those organizations or just reach out to them directly.
Thank you.
All right, Ken, go ahead with your question, please.
Yeah, I mean, who establishes the regulations on shoreline armoring? Is that the state, the county, or both? And
yeah, good
effective?
question. Yep, it's both. So the county has a set of regulations about shoreline armoring under its Shoreline Management Act, our Shoreline Master Program. And those are, they have gotten tighter over the years as we've learned more about the negative impacts. So you do really have to show kind of a threat to a primary structure. If you really need one and your house is going to fall in the sea without it, then you need one, right? But in many cases, people sort of think they need one, even if their house is 100 feet back and the erosion rate is, a 1/4 of an inch a year. And then State Fish and Wildlife under the hydraulic code. So they also, a permit's required from them for shoreline armoring. And then if you're building a structure down below mean high or high water, which is virtually impossible these days, unless you're a port or a marina, but then you would also need a US Corps of Engineers, so a federal authorization.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Ken Caruso, go ahead with your question, please.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Tina, for a really fascinating talk. I'm not sure if I should be embarrassed or what about saying this, but that aerial photograph you had of Susha Island last Mother's Day, we were one of those floating pieces of plastic out there in the bay. And I've often wondered how much effect is there from so many boats in such small areas at one time. And not just the anchoring, but also there's a lot of people that use, that flush out their dishwater. And I've even seen boats running their washing machines while they're anchored in some bay like that. So Shallow Bay, Echo Bay, Blind Bay, they're all affected by that. And I actually have two questions. The other one is, I heard a talk a long time ago about the photic zone here in the San Juan Islands. And compared to other areas, we have, I don't know what the right word is, some irregularities to our photic zone, and very little data have been collected about what that photic zone is actually like. And I just wondered if you could give us an update on that.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that study. We definitely do have, well mixed, well flushed, highly clear water in many cases. So, in many communities where eelgrass is never deeper than 20 feet, we're seeing it at 35 feet. And I think you're right. People have really looked at that in association with eelgrass. I don't think we've looked at it yet really with kelps or all the other things that are growing, especially the understory kelps that are growing there. But we have many places where that are, especially sort of on the outer regions of the county, west side of San Juan Island, up by, Stewart and Susha. We've got very, very clear water.
Okay. A question about Crescent Beach. That's a very popular place to walk at low tide, and I'm just wondering if that's having an effect on the forage fishes when that goes on.
Yeah, so the great thing about forage fish eggs is because they're designed to be sort of exposed to the sun and then in the wave energy and in those high energy beaches and storm events, is that things like walking are just not an issue. Crescent Beach actually is, though, one of our few places in the county where we have all 3 species of forage fish. So there's herring spawning in the eelgrass, it's a sand lance winter spawning site, and it's a surf smelt spawning site. So in addition to all the shellfish that are there and all those other things, it is really one of our kind of high priority sites.
Very good. Are there any other questions for Tina? Any comments or anything? Well, I guess we're satisfied then.
Great. Thanks everyone for your time.
Yeah, so let's see where I get my thing. All right, so thank you, Tina, very much. We appreciate you joining us and sharing your expertise. I thought it was a tremendously fascinating presentation. And I want to thank all of our attendees for finding us on Zoom, Meeting of the Minds. And just a little commercial for Orca Senior Center. If you appreciate Meeting of the Minds and other programming like this, we invite you to make a $5 contribution. You can either pay by check or you can go to our website. And I'm just going to post something in the chat right now. It has our email address and our mailing address. And interest, so you can take a look there if you'd like information on donating. And please join us next month. Will be our final presentation for Meeting of the Minds for the 2021 season. We've extended the season to accommodate this next presentation, which is in conjunction with Friends of Moran. And in honor of Moran State Park centennial this year, we're pleased to have writer historian Janet Oakley. And Janet Oakley is going to present CCC in Moran State Park. The CCC, of course, is the Civilian Conservation Corps, which Tina says that she has the pleasure of working with very recently. So they're still doing good works here in this area. And just a reminder, pre-registration for the event just gets you a reminder sent to you the day before. So if you'd like to receive a reminder of that next event, go ahead and pre-register. Otherwise, there's no point in registering. And I think that concludes this presentation, Meeting of the Minds. And Tina, I really appreciate it. And
Yeah, thank you, John. Thanks for the opportunity. Thanks, everyone. Go play in your gardens now.
that's
you.
right. Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.